What's up, guys, and welcome back to White Wolf Friends English.
A few days ago, we had the honor and joy of being able to interview Miss Tanya Jordening from English Coach 3Ts right here on YouTube. We did a video collaboration. She interviewed us about Arkansas. If you want to see that video, you can go over to her channel to watch it. But then we interviewed her on what that fluency journey is like and how long it takes, how difficult it is, and a lot of questions a lot of people often ask us.
Yeah, this is a really good opportunity for you guys to dive into the mind of an English teacher that has had a ton of experience. And honestly, she said something in the interview that really changed the way I really look at language learning.
Moreover, Miss Tanya brings a lot of experience from her own language learning journeys as well, which you guys can listen to in this interview today.
There are some technical issues that we had during the process, so please be a little patient with that. But we just wanted to get it out there as soon as possible for you guys so that you guys can enjoy, take in the wisdom of Miss Tanya Jordening through this interview. So enjoy.
So we are here with Miss Tanya Jordening. So please let us know what you do and how you got into it.
Absolutely. So I am the creator of English Coach 3Ts and also the She Speaks Fluency program for women who have an intermediate level. And I teach women who are at an intermediate level how to become more fluent so that they can speak confidently and be happy wherever they're living or working.
Do you mainly work with people like here in the States or online?
That's a great question. All of my classes are online and my students come from all over the world. I do have a number of students here in the United States, all over the States, but also in Canada. But typically they've immigrated from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
have students that are still living in other countries as well.
So as a teacher, what would you say is something you kind of specialize in for like teaching English? Like what's your methodology when you have these students come in and they say, I want to learn English? What's the primary way that you do that?
I am a certified English teacher, but I'm also a certified coach. And so a lot of what I do is working with people who are stuck in some way. Coaching training specifically works with that, as well as this is where I want to be. How do I get there? So with English, a lot of times that has to do with some of the things we don't even think about being problems like our confidence or balance in our lives or whatever is keeping us from being able to actually do all the things that need to be done to become fluent. We were talking over on my channel about the fact that it takes a long time and it takes a lot of work. And so that's one of the main things I help students with. And then I would say my main teaching methodology or way of teaching is through using comprehensible input, also known as story learning, just because it's the most natural way to learn. And I think also the most fun and interesting way to learn.
Have you personally gone down this route out of the languages that you have studied in the past of using storytelling? And if you did that help, do you think?
Absolutely. So I studied the traditional way. I studied French in high school and college for 6 years. And I always say I learned nothing. Of course, I learned something. I can't speak any French. I can pick out a little when I hear it. But for 6 years of study, it was mind blowing to me how little I knew. I could pass tests. Actually, I could do well on tests, but I couldn't use the language. When I really got serious about studying and learning Spanish a little over 8 years ago, I did start with more traditional methods, but I was moving in the direction of more natural learning because that's what I used with my kids. I homeschooled my kids. But I kept running into these blocks that were from things that we were taught. We being anyone who was taught in a traditional setting, like in your childhood. So I discovered comprehensible input just I talked about comprehensible input all the time. As teachers, we talked about it, but the method of comprehensible input, I didn't really start to research that and use it myself until a few years ago or a couple of years ago. And when I implemented it or put it into my own language learning, it was unbelievable.
Mhm.
Unbelievable. I went from this kind of language learning, which there's nothing wrong with that, to and I could see my own progress more rapidly. And so then I decided I wanted to try it from the start. And that's why I'm currently using it, trying very hard to use only comprehensible input to learn German, which can be very challenging. There aren't as many resources, but I love having the experience myself from the beginning, even though I don't typically work with beginner students. I do occasionally because it's amazing to me as someone who's taught for a long time with different methods to see how effective it is.
What's a resource that you used in Spanish to kind of help you kind of push you in that storytelling kind of learning?
Yes, I did some kind of research about Stephen Krashen. And then through doing that, I found Dreaming Spanish, which is a platform that provides a lot of free comprehensible input. And then you can become a member for a very affordable price. And I use them all the time. Also, I know the gentleman who started is named Pablo. I don't know his last name, but he's a great resource for learning about principal input, especially if you speak Spanish, but they do have English subtitles. He, I think, is very good at teaching how to find comprehensible input. So now that I've done a lot more study, I create a lot of my own comprehensible input with different methods and that kind of thing.
That's so
That's
cool.
fantastic.
That's amazing. I also had a similar story. I learned Spanish for 3 years in high school, and like you just said, going through all the traditional means, man, it was an uphill battle. Like I just didn't want to learn Spanish, even though I'd had these 3 years of learning Spanish. And I look back on it, I'm like, man, I feel like I had wasted so much time. But you're definitely right in that the methodology of just the rote memorization and the rote practices and the test taking and all this stuff, it is challenging to get to fluency that way.
Very challenging. I would almost say it is pretty close to impossible only doing that. Doing that doesn't mean you won't become fluent. Of course, you learn things, but I think it's the slow road for sure. It just takes a lot longer.
Well, and I think right there we need to like identify what fluency is because I've noticed everybody has a different definition of fluency. And part of it sounds like marketing, like, oh, it just means you've put in like this many hours, or it means you've put in, this many years, or it means you can hold this conversation in this particular context and
That's what I'm
pass the
saying.
TOEFL test. Like, how would you define fluency?
I would say not everyone agrees with me, but I definitely do not define it by a test. If you need to
Right.
take a test, then you need to take a test, and it won't necessarily help you with your fluency. It might help a little, but if you need to take it, you need to take it. And I could say a lot about that. But if fluency is what you're looking for me, and this is one of the things I do with my students as well, is help them to define what are your needs? What's
Mhm.
most important of those needs? Where
Mhm.
do you need to get to first? How can you get there first? And for me
Mm.
personally, I wanted to be able to have meaningful conversations in Spanish. So, after a year or two, I could have conversations that were maybe not so meaningful, but we could relay information. I could maybe get in a taxi. I wanted to be able to talk to people about their thoughts and their ideas and kind of those intricacies of what their opinions are and that kind of thing. And I think that you can find out some measurable ways to get there, but it's very organic. So for me, I reached that fluency goal after I started using comprehensible input. And now I just want to make it even richer so that I can have even richer conversations.
Yeah. It's funny how a lot of people say it's like a moving goalpost. Like
Yes.
it's just like you finally get to functional fluency, meaning you can operate in your job just fine. People understand you in online trainings, whatever. But then some people are like not satisfied with that. They want to go more and more and more. And I think that's what it is. It's just deepening and enriching and
Yeah.
just making that language more meaningful and be able to express yourself in more ways.
Yeah.
So maybe you don't know every synonym for bad, for example, but at least you can choose one that more accurately represents what you're talking about, or
Yeah.
it takes it to a deeper level.
Well, and the big question is what are the blockers to that, right? So in your experience with teaching your students, like what's something that it's just a big hurdle that some of your students have to kind of get past something to just help push them closer to your idea of fluency?
I would say it's kind of twofold and they work together. One is that they have a preconceived idea of what that is that may or may not be realistic. And two, because of that preconceived idea and that mindset, what they're doing is not actually getting them to what they want. I think it's really important to know what you individually want. You need to take the test or whatever that. But if you're going to use it at work, for example, there's nothing wrong with taking business English. I have friends who teach business English and I'm glad they're out there. But just because you have the functional fluency in business English doesn't mean that you can function in the job the way you might want to. Because a
Yes.
lot of business, for example, is networking. And
Yes.
if you can't have a conversation outside of that business English, then the networking becomes difficult.
Yeah.
A lot of it is like putting these pieces together and not thinking, okay, I hear this a lot. I want to get to C2. What do you mean by getting to C2? And
Right.
why do you want to get there? And what do you want to do with it? Because there are many pieces to that that you could achieve and start using now that actually will help you to have a stronger C2, if that's what you want to
Yeah.
call it, eventually.
It is funny how we've put measures on something so immeasurable. Like, we don't do that as native speakers. We don't say, oh, you're a C2 speaker or you are an advanced writer. We don't really say that.
In fact, I think there are lots of native speakers and even successful people who are native speakers who couldn't pass that C2 test. I
Mhm.
sometimes think if I could look at the questions and I go, this is not a helpful question.
I've often wanted to take the TOEFL completely unprepared and then actually see what score I get because as an English teacher, we totally get it and we totally agree. Language is about communication, and communication is honestly way more messy than a test is. You get tangled in the weeds, you get distracted, you go on tangents, you forget your point. That would be a native conversation. That would be a
Yeah.
very fluent conversation.
No, you should answer me within 30 seconds. Just tell
Right.
me.
In this
As
time frame and say it with these points. Nobody ever talks like that. So
No.
the test is good for getting you to whatever you want to get to with the test, like into that university, into that company, whatever it is. But it's not necessarily giving you the skills you need at that university. In fact, my daughter, who taught for me for a while, she taught at a university for a while for people who had to pass those tests but couldn't function in their classes. I wouldn't say I'm totally against tests, although I wouldn't choose that if I were the one making the choices. But if you need to take the test, find someone who teaches that because there actually are tricks and tips to taking tests so that you can do that so that you can work on your fluency.
it's almost kind of get that out of the way so that you
Yes.
can operate as a student, operate as an employee.
Study the test, take the test, study the test strategy behind that. It's not so much improving your English overall as it is then.
Yeah. What are some things that people can do then as they grow in their English, as you've seen, as they go from beginner to intermediate or intermediate to advanced, whatever these terms are, as they grow in their English, what is a strategy that you've seen kind of changes the game, kind of really escalates their language learning as they progress into fluency?
I am a big proponent of using all these skills naturally and together, integrating them so that you're not leaving one out. Even if your goal is, I want to speak more fluently. Still need to practice all these other skills because they all work together and they can't really be totally separated out. And I am a huge proponent of comprehensible input no matter what your goal is, especially if you're getting a nice round balance of different types of input. Reading, listening, different kinds of videos and audios and that kind of thing while you're doing whatever else, you're continuing to get a lot of natural input, just like anybody living in the country would get.
Absolutely. That comprehensible input is so helpful. And we hear it more, especially for our advanced learners. They hear it all the time. Maybe they came through a program that pushed that in their intermediate or beginner levels, right? But when they get to advanced, it's like it's easy to just drop it or throw it out.
Yeah, you get a
I
lot of
don't
like
know.
when you're in the beginner and intermediate, you get a lot of BBC English, right? You get a lot of
Mhm.
resources that are available. You get a lot of learn English
Stories.
from friends or from movies or something like
Yes.
that, TV shows. And then like as you kind of get to where you're kind of getting a grasp on English, it's like the resources drop off really quickly.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's an element of going for native material, but I think there's kind of a hurdle that some language learners kind of go of like, I've only done BBC English for a long, long time, so it's really hard for me to go straight to whatever CNBC or something like that, where it's just designed for native speakers. How do you basically get your students to go through that, to kind of go over that hurdle of like, I don't know if I'm ready for that? How do you get them to do that?
In my program, we make a practice plan and we come back to this practice plan pretty regularly, talking about what's working and what's not working. And there are many different criteria that says something's working and also something's not working. And one of the things I like to say specifically about what you just said, Josh, is if this channel, news source, series, whatever it is, has one that doesn't work for you, doesn't mean none of them will work for you,
Mm.
and vice versa. I think it is really important to have a lot of resources ready for you at any time. When I find resources for myself and also for my students, we kind of gather these resources and put them where we can get to them easily so that if I'm going along with this podcast, let's say that I love, and it's a native podcast, and suddenly I'm listening to 2 episodes and I don't understand it all, I am not thinking, oh, that's it, I can never listen to this again. I think this episode and this episode were challenging for me. I'm going to try that again in 1, 2, or 3 months or even weeks.
Mm.
But I have all of this other stuff that I can use now. Because I think the key is always having resources where you are enjoying them and you're understanding at least 95%. Because I didn't understand this, it just means this is great. I have resources for the future.
That is so cool. I will say, as language teachers, we hear comprehensible input a lot. What I love about your strategy is that it's almost like you take comprehensible input and the things that are incomprehensible later down the road will be comprehensible input. Like you just said, it's not like you just throw in the trash can, you keep it for later and then you go back to it. I think that's phenomenally helpful. Going back to Chinese books, like I would read something, I'd be like, nah, I have no idea. That's white noise. All it is just like, yeah, I understood, and then just, and then I understood again. Just leaving it alone, oh man, it was such a waste. Going back to it was so helpful. I think for me personally, it's just a realization like, I know more now. Couldn't understand that.
It feels good.
Yeah, it's like self-validation. Like I couldn't do it. Now I can do it. So good.
Absolutely. I think it's a great way to see your progress yourself. I was actually doing it like this before I really embraced the idea of comprehensible input as a main method. And that's one of the things that sold me on it.
That is awesome. Well, we have been through so much of the time already. So, where can people find you and your program and work with you? We have a lot of intermediates in our audience that would really benefit from working with you and watching your videos for comprehensible input.
Yes, I would love that. So I'm here on YouTube at English Coach 3Ts, the same name on Instagram and my website. And those are really the best places you can usually find the free classes that I'm offering at any given time on my website for sure, but typically also on YouTube and Instagram.
We will put a link to those things in the description just to make it easy for people to find you and get over to you.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Thank you
Very-
so much for jumping on with us. This has been really fun, but it's also unique because finding a language teacher who has also studied language and has aimed for fluency, not just passing a test or just taking it in college, super valuable to have somebody who understands what it's like.
A breath of fresh air for sure.
Thank you. And I would also like to invite anyone here who is a follower of the two of you, they already love you, come over to my channel and see our conversation and get to know Josh and Amber just a little more.
Yes, we talk about Arkansas, so that's a very interesting conversation. If you know Texas, you need to learn a little bit about Arkansas.
Yes, it is one of the 50 states. We
It
don't
is. It
have
is there.
California and New York. We have a lot of wonderful states.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Tanya.
Yeah, it was
Thank
great getting
you
to talk
so
to you.
You too. It's always great to get to know you a little more.